Hi, I'm Francis. Welcome to my vlog. And for this video, I'm gonna be teaching you how to bring the fine dine experience in the comfort of your own home. Why do we want to bring that fine dine experience in our table? We all know that the pandemic limited and restricted our physical activities. We are left with no choice but to celebrate our milestones in our home. I've realized that now more than ever, we should be spending time with our family and celebrate with them our milestones. But our celebrations have become very mundane and usual. We keep on eating the same thing over and over again, preparing the same meal each time that we always see in usual handaan. So I had an idea. Why not we bring that fine dine experience in our table? Why not spice up our repetitive and usual celebrations and bring the fine dine experience along with it? I had more time in improving my cooking skills. With the aid of YouTube, I was able to learn certain recipes which I know my siblings enjoyed. But aside from that fact, I actually got my interest in cooking from my parents. Both my mom and dad actually cook really well. And now I will try to put into practice that learning that I got from them. So much for this little background. Let's now go to whatever I will cook today. Let's now start preparing that fine dine inspired dinner. The first thing that we need to do is to buy the needed ingredients for our elevated celebratory dinner. Now for this meal, I've decided to go for a good old ribeye steak with asparagus and a mashed potato. For the steak, I got a 3-piece 1.5-inch ribeye steak from Landers. I also got a fresh bundle of asparagus which will serve as our side. As I already have the needed ingredients for our mash, I only needed to buy the steak and asparagus from the store. Now for the ingredients needed, of course we need a steak. We will season it with salt and pepper, and we will later finish it with around 3 to 5 cloves of garlic, a tablespoon of dried rosemary, and 2 tablespoons of butter. For the asparagus, we will just be needing olive oil, salt and pepper to taste, and butter. Lastly, for our mash, we will need 3 to 5 pieces of medium potatoes, heavy cream, salt and pepper, butter, and dried parsley. Now, it's time to prepare the things that we will use. Let's start by preheating our oven to 375° Fahrenheit or 190° Celsius, since we will use it later for both our steak and mashed potato. Once our oven is preheating, we will now boil 3 cups of water for our mashed potato. It is important to season your water with salt so the potato can already infuse a little bit of flavor while it's boiling. While the water is boiling, we will now prepare our steak. Make sure to defrost your meat at least 30 minutes prior to cooking. For some people, they usually cook their steak straight from the packaging, but for this one, I've decided to thoroughly rinse the meat with salt and water to remove that extra blood. After rinsing the meat, make sure to dab it with a paper towel or any material that would absorb the excess liquid. And before seasoning it, make sure that it has completely dried up. For the mash, we will use the typical starchy potato available in the market. My parents taught me that the best potatoes are the dirtiest ones, the ones that still have soil and dirt in it, so you know it's fresh. But of course, we need to thoroughly rinse our potatoes, and once it's completely clean, we can now peel it. For this one, I obviously used a peeler because it's what a peeler does. Make sure to soak your potatoes in a bowl of water after peeling it so it doesn't dry up. This process would also keep your potatoes from discoloring and oxidizing. After peeling, we will now cut the potatoes into smaller pieces so it would cook more quickly and evenly, and you wouldn't have a hard time mashing it later. Once the salted water is boiling, you may now put the sliced potatoes into the pot and wait for the potatoes to soften. It usually only takes around 15 to 20 minutes of boiling time since our potatoes are already small. We will know if our potato is ready for mashing once they're fork tender. Using a fork, poke the potatoes, and once you feel that it's already soft, you can now drain it using a colander. Now for the mashing, since we don't have a ricer, we will only use the same fork we poked the potatoes with. Make sure to achieve this type of consistency in your mash. But our work doesn't actually end here. I learned that the best way to achieve a very fine and smooth mash is to sieve it with a fine mesh sieve or a strainer. Compared to the typical masher and ricer, a sieve would help achieve a silkier and smoother mash. It is tedious, but it is worth the effort. Once we've fully sieved our potatoes, we can now add our heavy cream and season it with salt and pepper to taste. I've also added garlic powder and dried parsley to give our mash some extra color and flavor. Once fully incorporated, we will now top it with butter and toss it in the oven to give it an extra texture and of course to melt the butter. The mash will only take around 5 to 10 minutes in the oven. Now the steak. Once fully dried up, we will now season our steak. For the seasoning, we will only be using salt and pepper because the simpler, the better. I've learned that we should not be putting the seasoning separately. We should first mix the salt and pepper in a different bowl prior to applying it to the meat. This is to ensure that the meat would have an equal distribution of salt and pepper all around it. Of course, we don't want an unseasoned part in our meat. Just spread the salt and pepper mixture into our steak and rest it for about 3 to 5 minutes so the steak could absorb all these flavors from the seasoning. For the frying, we will be using a cast iron pan. Now, skillets are a bit hard and complicated to use. You should ensure that the pan is already hot before pouring oil in it. And for the oil, we will just be using a standard olive oil. Once the pan and oil is hot, you can now gently put your steak in the skillet. You should also note that when putting the steak in the pan, it should be away from you. I actually don't know what it does, but Gordon Ramsay said that it should be that way, so yeah. We will be frying each side of the steak for about 3 minutes. But what I usually do when cooking steaks is to flip it every minute. So it's about 5 to 6 times of flipping if my math is right. Halfway through its cooking time, we will now be putting 2 tablespoons of butter, 3 to 5 cloves of garlic, and a tablespoon of dried rosemary. After around 6 minutes in the pan, we will now toss our steak in the oven for 375 degrees Fahrenheit or around 180 to 200 degrees Celsius. The steak will cook there for about 10 to 15 minutes depending on how thick your meat is and what doneness you want your steak to achieve. For this one, we are actually aiming for a well done because apparently it is what most Filipinos like. So yeah, after cooking the steak in the oven, it's now time to rest it. It's important for the steak to rest for about 3 to 5 minutes so that it can render back the juices that's been taken away from them during the cooking time. Now the greens. We will be cooking the asparagus last since we don't want an all sugged up veggie side. For this one, we will be cooking it in a cast iron pan as well. We will just put olive oil in the pan and we will just fry it. For the seasoning, I just put salt and pepper and finish it with a tablespoon of butter. Now, it's time to plate. Tonight, we are actually not celebrating anything, but the fine dine experience wouldn't be complete without a subtle fine dine setup. Now for this one, I only use stuff that are available at home. Let's start with a good table runner to give our table some color, and let's top it with a Christmas-themed tablecloths. What is fine dine without a wine glass? So we're using a wine glass for our red wine that's been sitting around in our fridge for God knows how long. Now, it's time to serve our steak and mash. For the steak, I just sliced it into strips and served it in a rustic wooden sangkalan to make it a bit special. Now, we are done. It's time to eat. I hope you like what I prepared in this video, and I wish that you'd also be able to spice up your at-home celebrations and make it even more special. as this simple gesture may show how much you love and appreciate those that you serve. It's been a long day, and this has been Francis. Goodbye.